Hi, everyone, and welcome to Expert Lenses, our newly redesigned webinar series tailored specifically for business owners. I am Camila Diaz, the event specialist at Virtual Latinos, and I am thrilled to have you here. Expert Lenses is designed to provide you with top-notch content from seasoned experts across various industries. Our sessions are enlightening, actionable, and tailored to keep you ahead in today's dynamic business landscape. Today, we're excited to kick off with our first session, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, hosted by the renowned Douglas Noll. Douglas is a lawyer turned peacemaker, mediator, and author of the award-winning book, De-escalate. He will share practical strategies and counterintuitive listening skills to quickly diffuse those conflicts in both personal and professional settings. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today in this journey of growth and discovery. Welcome to Expert Lenses, where expertise meets innovation and success is just a lens away. Let's get started. Hi, Douglas. How are you today? We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Camila. Great to be here. Are you ready?
Yes, we are. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Doug Noll. As Camila said, I'm a lawyer turned peacemaker based in California. And my journey was an interesting one. I was a lawyer for 22 years and then decided to go back to school mid-career and earn my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And that prompted me to leave the practice of law in 2000, a very successful civil trial practice, and become a peacemaker. One of the problems that I had as a peacemaker was that I was not able to calm angry people. However, I had an epiphany in 2005, which led me to develop a set of skills. And then 2 years later, a brain scanning study, which we'll talk about later this afternoon, came out of UCLA that showed why this skill that I discovered worked to calm any angry person in 90 seconds or less. And I ended up writing my fourth book on this topic, De-escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. And today, the promise that I make to all of my clients, and actually the promise I'll make to you, is that if you follow the steps that I give you today, you will never have a fight or argument again in your life. Put a 1 in the chat if you think that's something you'll learn how to do. Imagine never having a fight or argument again in your life. 1 in the chat if that motivates you. Amazing. That's right. Okay. So let me just give you a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about today. Obviously, in an hour, I can't give you full mastery, but I can introduce you to the ideas. And at the end, there'll be a link to a page on my website that will give you all kinds of resources that you can continue to follow if you want to learn more. What we're going to do today is start off by examining some cultural myths that have gotten in the way of us understanding emotions. And then we're going to look at how we respond to 4 common problems and why we respond the way we do, understanding that they never work. And then we're going to start taking a dive into emotions themselves. And we're going to end up looking at a skill called affect labeling, which is the ability to read and reflect somebody else's emotions. And we'll end with a video demonstration of me affect labeling my wife, and we'll close out with you sharing any observations that you might have. You'll learn the basics of the skill. This is a skill that, like riding a bike, requires practice. It's not something you can just read about or write about. You actually have to go out and do it. But you'll be given enough information today that if you do practice it, you should start seeing almost immediate results. So also, I want to say that I've got the chat window open on my screen over, let's see, yeah, I guess it'd be over there. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat as they come up. Every now and then I'll ask you to engage. I'll ask you a question to put a number in the chat or comment on something just to keep you engaged. And that way, hopefully, even though this is somewhat of an asymmetrical presentation, we'll be able to converse back and forth as Zoom allows us to do this. All right, so we want to start off with the Western philosophy. By Western philosophy, I mean the philosophy that started with the Greeks and the Romans and actually before that, as opposed to Eastern philosophy, which would be probably Chinese and Japanese philosophy. Very different strands of thought over thousands and thousands of years. Most of us all live in Western culture, whether you're in North America or South America, we are the product of Western philosophy. So it becomes interesting to understand how Western philosophy has shaped us in terms of our views towards emotion. Going back at least 4,000 years, philosophers have told us that emotions are bad and rationality is good. Plato, for example, saw reason and emotion as two horses that were pulling a chariot, and they were pulling in different directions, and the purpose of the mind was to try to control emotions and control the mind. And so it was seen as a struggle to control emotions. That was just based on observation of human behavior. And philosophers and theologians just saw that emotions almost always led to bad decisions, bad behaviors, and bad outcomes. So no wonder that over many, many, many thousands of years, emotions got a really bad rap. Aristotle asked the question, what distinguishes human beings as a species from other animals? As the answer was, it was the capacity for reason. And so we've come to believe that we are rational, reasoning beings, and what separates us from other species is the ability to be rational, the ability to be reasoned. Immanuel Kant, a philosopher of the 17th century, said that emotions are bad and rationality is good. And philosopher after philosopher after philosopher for generations have all essentially said that emotions are bad, human beings are rational, the highest good or the highest attainment for a human being is to be a rational being, kind of like Mr. Spock in Star Trek. But it turns out they're all wrong. Neuroscience has shown us in the last 20 years that we are 98% emotional and only 2% rational. In fact, every decision we make is an emotional decision. There is no such thing as rationality. And sometimes I get a little pushback on this, and I always ask somebody, if you think we're rational, then give me a definition of what it means to be rational. And you will find that there is no uniform definition of rationality. It's a word that's used commonly, or its opposite, irrationality, but no one is ever able to give us a clear definition of what it means to be rational. And that's because we are emotional beings, not rational beings. And everything we do is emotional. And if you can make that mind shift set to recognize that we're emotional, then it becomes easier to understand that we have lost along the way the ability to understand emotions and work with them. And now we have neuroscience that's giving us a whole new set of tools that allows us to reach our highest potential as human beings if we're willing to recognize that we're emotional beings, not rational beings. And you remember, I'm saying this as a trial lawyer and a law professor, somebody where the law is based on reasoning and so-called rational thinking. So for me to make this mind shift was really difficult. But I advocate this because I have found that this is fundamentally true. So rationality does not exist. And it's especially important when we're dealing with human relationships to understand there is no such thing in rationality when it comes to two human beings interacting with each other. I love this quote from Einstein. He said, I never made one of my discoveries through the process of rational thinking. All of his discoveries were made from a non-rational process, using his imagination and his creativity, which he then proved using mathematics. So he used the systems of mathematics to prove ideas that he generated in a non-linear, non-rational manner. You'll never create anything with logic. Logic does not create new ideas, whether it's inductive or deductive. Logic allows you to evaluate information, but it does not in of itself create new information. Same thing with mathematics. And this is a point that a lot of people don't understand or get. So The first rule that I teach my clients is that when we're engaged in any kind of relationship, whether it's a business relationship, you're working as a leader on a team and you got people reporting to you, or you're on a team with peers, or you're at home working with your partner or your children, the first thing that you need to do is abandon reason. Reasoning has no business in relationships. Well, that sounds kind of weird, doesn't it? You've thought that everything has to do with reasoning, but it actually doesn't. Reasoning is the cognitive process of thinking about something to form a conclusion or judgment. It's a tool. And we use reasoning for 4 different purposes: analyzing information, making connections between ideas, solving problems, making decisions based on evidence, critical thinking, and logic, and engaging in strategic planning. These are the 5 reasons that we engage in different types of reasoning processes. But none of this has anything to do with relationship. So what we have to do when we want to learn how to stop fights and arguments forever in your life is you have to abandon reason. You have to recognize that we are emotional beings, and logic and critical thinking and scientific method and linear problem solving, none of that works in relationship. And I don't care what kind of relationship it is. It could be a professional relationship between a lawyer and a client, or a doctor and a patient. It could be a business relationship between people within an organization. It could be a relationship between a customer and a vendor or service provider. It doesn't matter what the human relationship is. That relationship is foundationally an emotional relationship. And the moment you start to understand that, you'll start to see a whole different way of being. You'll see behaviors that you've never seen before, and those behaviors become highly predictable. And in addition, there are interventions that I will show you in a little bit that work every single time to either prevent an argument or fight from emerging in the first place, or if somebody has gotten into a fight or argument, to calm them down in less than 90 seconds. It sounds amazing. It's based on science. It works every time. So why is this? I mean, how we gotten here? Part of it is the way that our brains are structured. Our brains are set up so that we are very good at solving problems, but we're not so good at relationships. And the reason for that is that we have 2 brain systems that are acting antagonistically. In other words, when one brain system is on, the other brain system is off. And in this case, the 2 brain systems that we're working on are the task focus system. This is the part of the brain that we use for problem solving and critical thinking and logic and linear problem solving. And logic, it's called the task focus system. And when it's on, we can't be social. On the other hand, when we're social and we're trying to relate to people, the social system in our brain turns on and the task focus system turns off. How many, put a 2 in the chat if this has ever happened to you. You're working on your computer or you're really intensely concentrating on somebody, and somebody comes in and wants to chat with you, just socially, and you immediately feel annoyance and irritation. Right. It happens to us all the time and every day. And what's going on here is that when we're concentrating, the task-focused system in our brain is on, and the social system is off. When somebody comes by us and wants to sit down and have a cup of coffee with us, just be socialized and chat, we literally have to turn off the task-focused system and turn on the social system. It takes about a second or 2, and we are annoyed at the effort that it takes to turn one system off in order to turn another system on. And sometimes it works the other way. Some people get really engaged in their social system. So, for example, they'll want to be on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, and now they've got to turn that off and go back to doing a task that requires concentration. Many, many people find that very, very effortful because you have to turn one system off and the other system on. We cannot multitask between these 2 systems. And I can see that from the comments in the chat that a lot of people relate to this, which is great because this is the way we are. This is how we're hardwired. Well, it turns out that our educational system works to educate the task-focused system. So, for example, when we go to school, we gain knowledge. We learn about rules, procedures, and algorithms. We learn, for example, at a very young age, how to count to 10. That's an algorithm. How to do multiplication, how to add and subtract. These are all algorithms and rules and procedures that we start learning, starting with the very simple and moving to the very complex. Later in life, we start learning critical thinking processes. We learn about reasoning. We learn about logic, inductive and deductive logic. We may learn about probability analysis, which is a much more complex type of problem solving and analytical framework. We might learn quantitative and qualitative analysis, and we might learn about the scientific method. All of these are tools that the task-focused system can apply to solve problems. None of these tools have anything to do with relationship. And isn't it interesting that education only trains the task-focused system? What education does not do is teach the skills that strengthen our social system. For example, empathy is a skill that must be learned. I'm going to teach you empathy today. I'm going to teach you the skill of empathy. But we're not taught how to do this. When we should be taught this at 2 or 3 years old, we are not taught how to do this. We're not taught about emotions. We're taught mostly that emotions are bad or irrational or make us weak or vulnerable. We're taught not to cry. Horrible, horrible advice, which causes a huge amount of abuse. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. We're not taught how to listen. What's interesting about listening is not only are we not taught how to listen, we are told that we are ordered to listen. And this starts in childhood when we're ordered to pay attention. But we're never taught how to truly listen. We are commanded to listen, but not taught how to listen. And that's a big difference. We're not taught how to reflect what we hear other people say and do. We're not taught how to de-escalate ourselves and other people when we get reactive and triggered and highly emotional. We're not taught about emotional intelligence and how to grow emotional intelligence. We're not taught how to develop emotional self-awareness. And we're not taught how to reprogram all of the childhood triggers that we all accumulate that cause us to engage in emotional negative behaviors as adults. None of this stuff is taught to us. And as a result, we come out of childhood completely at a loss for how to be in relationship with people. One of the things that I'm reading about today, put a 3 in the chat if you're facing this. I'm reading a lot about how people are experiencing loss of connection, inability to be in relationship, and as a result, deep loneliness. And a lot of it's, of course, because of the internet and people being on devices and stuff. But is this something you've heard about or experiencing yourself, or nobody who's experienced about it? Put it in a 3. Let's see how in this group how bad is this, or how bad do you see it? Anybody? And this is all, I think, because we've never been formally taught how to relate to each other. We kind of leave it to the families to do this, but imagine parents that are 21, 22, 23, 24 years old. They don't have these skills. How can they teach these skills to their children? So I think that we expect our families to teach too much. We put too much burden on them. And our educational system is completely ill-equipped to teach these skills. And as a result, we have a population of human beings who are emotionally incompetent. And that's where our fights and arguments come from. It's because of emotional incompetency. And the beauty of it is, the great news is, it's easily reversed. And we're going to reverse it with all of you today. Okay, so that's the big picture. We have to change our mindset, recognize that we are emotional beings, not rational beings. We have to get out of the idea that reasoning is the highest and best use of our human potential. The highest and best use of our human potential are to become emotionally functioning human beings. And when we become emotionally functioning, everything changes. And the way that you're going to become emotionally functioning is learning how to listen to emotions. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about common strategies for dealing with emotions. There are 4 common strategies, and let's see how many of these you all relate to. All right, let's start with emotional invalidation. We've got this little girl, 4 years old maybe, 3 years old, and she is obviously upset. What is she told? She's told it's not that big a deal. There's no reason to cry, but I do listen to you. You're not being rational. Imagine saying that to a 4-year-old. Don't be sad. You're way too emotional. It can't be that bad. Get over it. You'll be okay. Don't be such a drama queen. Stop crying. You've got it all wrong. Let me go back to that slide for a second. All right. I want you to put a 4 in the chat if anything like this has ever been said to you. And also put in the chat words to describe what it feels like when you're upset and somebody puts you down, they emotionally invalidate you using these kinds of phrases. What's it feel like? What are the words that you would use to describe how you feel? Frustrating, unmotivated, discouraged, not seen or heard, whirling, impotent. Good. Anything else? Misunderstood. Frustrating. Absolutely. So, everybody can agree that when you are emotionally invalidated, it's a really negative experience. And it turns out this is one of the most pervasive and insidious forms of abuse that exists in relationships. So the question is, how many of you, knowing that being emotionally invalidated hurts, put a 5 in the chat if you have ever emotionally invalidated somebody else, especially a child. And the question is, why do we do this? If we know that being emotionally invalidated hurts, why is it that we emotionally invalidate those around us, especially those we love the most, which are our partners and our children? And there are 3 reasons why. Number 1, we don't know any better. Number 2, it was what was taught to us by our parents and their parents and the parents before them and generation to generation back. And number 3, the most important reason, is that when we emotionally invalidate, we are soothing our own anxiety over another person's emotions. So we've got this little girl who's really upset, and her upset provokes unconscious anxiety in the adults around her, so I can feel better about myself. And it turns out that emotional invalidation is extremely selfish. It's often unconscious, and it's devastating in terms of its effect on children and on adults. And yet it happens all the time. Any questions so far? So that's the first way that we deal with emotions and upset, is we emotionally invalidate. We push people away. The secret here, we'll get to the solution. Hang in there. We got to lay the problem out first. The first thing to understand is you cannot solve any emotional problem with logic or reasoning. You have to use emotional tools, and we'll get to those in just a second. The number 2 thing that we do is we jump to problem solving. How many times have you had an upset or you've had some emotion and somebody comes in and immediately says, look, if you would just do this, 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 and this, the problem will go away and you'll be fine. So you're getting all this unsolicited advice. And how does that make you feel? Put it in the chat. Anybody ever been, yeah, there you go. And guess what? The feelings that you have when somebody gives you unsolicited advice and tries to solve your problem for you are exactly the same feelings that you had when you were emotionally invalidated. And the same thing happens. How many of you, when somebody else is upset, you immediately jump in and try to solve their problem for them? How often does that happen? And if you find that you do this, it's going to be for exactly the same reasons that we emotionally invalidate. We're trying to soothe our own unconscious anxiety by telling another person what to do so they can stop being emotional to make us feel better about ourselves. It doesn't work. So I like to illustrate the problem with this little clip.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. You do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
It's not trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
You're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on. If you would just
Don't.
try to sneak things.
What? Can't fall in your mouth. Gotta go out. Mom.
So one of the things you want to think about is that it's not about the nail. And we're going to learn how to listen so that it never becomes about the nail in just a moment. But I want to cover the third way that we problem we have, and that is we've got, here you can see a mother with her teenage daughter, and we see the teenage daughter is completely shut down. Shutting down is an indication of the lack of emotional safety. And here's the thing that's really sad. Most people, when they're growing up between the ages of 6 and 8 years old, learn that the universe is an emotionally unsafe place. And so they project confidence on the outside, but on the inside, they're frightened to death that they will be seen for who they really are, which is the tiny little frightened child. And their emotional development stops. It becomes blocked or stunted between 6 and 8 years old. So while they grow cognitively, they do not grow emotionally. And so that's why there are times when you see 40-year-olds who are arguing and you say, oh, they're acting like 6 years old. And that's because at that moment they are acting like 6-year-old, because that's the limit of their emotional capacity. And that limited emotional capacity comes from not growing up in an emotionally safe place. One of the things that I teach in leadership is the need, the critical need of leaders to provide safety to teams. Physical safety, psychological safety, emotional safety, and spiritual safety. Leaders have the job of providing safety, especially emotional safety. And when they do that, their teams flourish, as has been shown by the Athena study at Google. Leaders that don't provide emotional safety find that they have a difficult time getting teams to produce. So shutting down is an indication of lack of emotional safety. And then the last way that thing that we see is when people get in our face and they're really angry. And so we become defensive. We appease, justify, explain, apologize, rationalize. We do whatever we can to say, stop being mad. And what does it do? Like everything else, we're invalidating, we're trying to soothe our own anxiety, and we just get that angry person even angrier. And in some really bad conditions, we become counter-aggressive. So we've got these 4 typical ways of responding to upset and emotion, and none of it works. So the question is, what does work? And in order to understand what does work, we've got to take a couple of little detours. The first thing we have to do is understand that what does work is listening. But it's not just any kind of listening. There are 2 types of listening. Type 1 listening is listener focused. So if I'm a listener and I'm engaged in type 1 listening, I am trying to fulfill my agenda by being the listener. So I might ask questions, and I'm just trying to gain information from you to help me figure stuff out, or I'm trying to soothe my own anxiety, or I'm really not paying attention to you, and I could really, truly not care about what you're saying because I'm focused on fulfilling my own agenda. That's type 1 listening, and that's the kind of listening that we almost always engage in. How many times have you been in a social conversation with somebody, and it goes something like this? Somebody says, "Yeah, I got my dog out. We went on this beautiful walk in the park the other day, and my dog was out running around. I had a great time. It was really fun." And the other person said, "Yeah, I got a dog too, and I went and took my dog to the park, and we just had a great time. I was throwing the ball for her, and she was just all over the place." Was there any listening going on in that exchange? Answer, no. One person told a story that didn't get listened to. The other person, who was the first listener, simply told a story about that person's experience. So it was all type 1 listening. It was listener-focused, not speaker-focused. Type 2 listening, on the other hand, is very different. It is speaker-focused. And when we are in type 2 listening, we are trying to listen to the speaker so the speaker feels heard from the speaker's frame of reference. We are trying to listen from the speaker's frame of reference so the speaker feels heard. My only agenda is to make sure that the speaker feels heard. And when you do this, the magic happens. There are 3 levels of this kind of listening. One is called paraphrasing, where you are simply summarizing what somebody says, their words. The second level is called or messaging, where you are summarizing what the speaker is trying to say. In other words, what is the intended meaning? And the third level, which is the deepest level that we're going to talk about today, is called affect labeling, which is where we ignore the words, pay attention to the speaker's emotions, and reflect the speaker's emotional experience. Well, to affect label, we need to have an understanding of what emotions are. And neuroscience tells us that since emotions dominate rationality, that we had better come up with some emotional tools to figure out what's going on. So let's start with a definition of emotions. Emotions are biologically based patterns of perception, experience, physiology, action, and communication that are culturally created in our brains. I could spend a whole lecture just on what emotions are. Just a couple of points to make here. Number one, unlike what you think, we are not born with emotions. Humans, it's interesting. Humans are the only species on the planet that have emotions. Your dog does not have emotion. Your cat does not have emotion. The primates probably don't have emotion. Emotions are singularly human constructs, and we construct emotions starting at about 18 months of age as the emotional centers of our brain start to come online. And emotions are culturally created because different cultures have different emotions. Emotions that we have here in North America are different from the emotions that people in Finland have, and are really different from a lot of the emotions that people in Asian cultures have. So one way that we can define culture is by saying, what are the emotions that define that culture? And that's probably the best definition of culture there is, not color of skin or language or ethnicity or anything like that. What are the emotions? All emotion is based on affect. And affect is the general feeling that we experience throughout the day, basically pleasantness versus unpleasantness. Affect has 2 components: valence, positive, neutral, negative, and arousal intensity, which could be low, moderate, or high. So if we look at the non-affect model of Sylvan-Tompkins, we see that on the positive side, we can be excited and interested. We can have happiness, joy, and enjoyment. Those are our 2 positive affects. We can have a neutral affect of surprise, startle, which could either be positive or negative, depending on the situation. And then look at all these negative affects we have: fear, terror, distress, anguish, anger, rage, disgust, dismell. That's this feeling we get when we smell spoiled milk. And shame, humiliation. And isn't it interesting that evolutionarily we have developed 6 negatives as opposed to 2 positives? It tells you something about the environment the human brain evolved in over the last 2 million years. So now we've got these 9 affect, this covers our valence, and now we've got arousal intensity, low, medium, and high. So basically what we have here is our palette of primary emotional tones. And from these emotional tones, we create the concept of emotions that are created in a part of the brain called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. These are cognitive constructs that will put together different affect. For example, you could take fear, terror, and combine it with surprise, startle, and some kind of enjoyment, joy, and you get the emotion of awe. And so all of these different affects can be mixed and matched, and each of them will have a different kind of emotion. And what we have to learn how to do as children is associate the emotional words or constructs around emotion to all these different experiences that we feel all the time. And when we do that, we are building an emotional database. It turns out that when we are using affect like this, it's information. And without affect, we could not process the information around us. It creates perceptions about our environment. Affect creates our reality. It controls our behavior, and it drives all of our decision making. So affect is really pivotal to what it means to be a human being. All emotion is based on affect. Emotion is nothing more than different affective states combined together, and then as a cognitive construct, there's an abstraction is created, and we put a word associated with it that describes the feeling that we have in that moment. So that means that our job as children, young children, toddlers, at about the time of verbalization, 18 months, is to engage in emotional categorization. And what we have to do is learn how to take affective experience and put words to what this experience is, describe the experience and put a label on it so we can access to it. And when we do that, it allows us to transform this core affect into an intentional state. In other words, we become conscious of how we feel. It allows us to draw inferences about what caused the change. Why am I so angry? I'll look around and say, that guy just insulted me. You can't do that if you're not aware of your anger. It tells us what to do next. Maybe I'll punch the guy's lights out. Maybe I'll walk away. And it permits communication of my anger to other people. I am really angry. Only humans can do this. No other animals can do this. And that's why only humans have emotions, because no other primate or vertebrate animal, or any animal for that matter, can do these sorts of things. As we mature, we have to develop emotional granularity. And what that means is we start with an affect, and we slowly are able to express emotional experience with more and more precision. So, for example, emotional granularity is not very common. Many people can only identify 3 emotions: happy, sad, and pissed off. And beyond that, they have no emotional granularity. They can't even name basic affect. Well, what should be happening is we'll take a negative affect like anger, and then it gets subdivided into different kinds of anger, like frustration, irritation, annoyance, aggravation, rage. And we should be able to be aware of and distinguish all these different anger states with granularity. And when we're able to do that, we are said to be emotionally self-aware. We're able to emotionally self-regulate, and we're able to engage in cognitive empathy. Most people do not have these skills, and it's for all the reasons I talked about before. We do not develop emotional granularity, and that is what leads to conflict and fights and arguments. Because once we get upset, we don't feel listened to, we don't feel heard, we feel disrespected. It starts like this, and then these 2 tectonic plates oil up, and boom, now we're in the fight. And it all comes down to not being able to manage emotions well. So that gets us to this concept known as alexithymia. Big word, but it has a simple meaning. It's the inability to categorize affect into emotion. It simply means that we haven't developed the skill or the ability to say what we're feeling in the moment. And people with alexithymia, studies show, have an inability to express emotion with any granularity. They have a decreased capacity to cope with strong emotions, or they feel their emotions rather than are able to express their emotions. So they have poor decision-making. Negative affect is more intensely experienced. They get even more angry, angrier. People with alexithymia have low emotional intelligence, high reactivity, decreased empathy, and it's a real problem. And in every single fighter argument, the people in the fighter argument have low alexithymia. I mean, they have alexithymia, and that's what's expressing themselves. And our job, here's the secret, to stop fights and arguments from ever happening in the first place, and to de-escalate angry people, we have to develop one simple skill. Oops, let me go this way. And that is, we need to reduce these alexithymic tendencies, and we're going to do this through the technique of affect labeling. And this is where, if you haven't been taking notes, this is where you might want to start taking notes. So affect labeling is a 3-step process. As I said before, there was a brain scanning study that came out in 2007, 2 years after I discovered this. And here is what the abstract of that study says. It says, affect labeling relative to other forms of encoding, which simply means bringing in information into the brain, diminish the response of the amygdala. That's really important. And other limbic regions to negative emotion. In other words, somebody's really escalated. And as they are affect labeled, those emotional reactive centers, the amygdala and the limbic system, which sit in the middle of the brain, are inhibited. They quiet down. Additionally, affect labeling increased activity in a single brain region, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. And that's important because the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex stores the emotional database. It stores all of these abstract concepts we call emotions. And when the emotional centers overwhelm the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, we can no longer process our emotions. And so all we're left is the reactive behaviors that we learned in childhood. And finally, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex and amygdala activity were inversely correlated, which means that as the emotions came down, the activity in the prefrontal cortex came up. And they have a reciprocal effect on each other. And that's why this technique can calm an angry person in 90 seconds or less, or stop a fighter argument from erupting in the first place. So the question is, how do we do it? Here's the science. If you were my graduate class, we'd spend some time looking at this, but I just want to show you, we do know what the circuits are. That's what they are. That's enough neuroscience for the day. What we need to do in the next few minutes is get to practicality. 3 steps. You're confronted with somebody who's really upset. The first thing you're going to do is ignore the words. I know you've been taught to pay attention to the words, but as I said before, you've never learned really how to listen. Ignore the words. You don't need to hear the words anymore. You've heard upset words all your life. You know, there's no new news here. So you can ignore the words, even though you've been strongly conditioned to pay attention to the words. I'm telling you, no, this is white noise. For the next 90 seconds, ignore whatever people are saying. Step number 2. You're going to guess at the emotions. I say guess, but really what you're going to do is read the emotions. Without going into evolutionary biology, our brains are hardwired to accurately and quickly read the emotions of another human being. All we have to do is let ourselves do it. And the way you do that is just empty your mind, be in silence, watch the speaker, full body, face, body language, tone of voice, all of that. And you'll immediately be able to begin to understand what the emotional experience is that person is having. Next step and last step is reflect back the emotions with a you statement. We do not engage in active listening. We do not use an I statement such as what I think you're feeling is X. Active listening was developed by psychologist Thomas Gordon in the 1950s. He was a protege of Carl Rogers. Active listening has never worked. It will not work today, and it will never work in the future. So if you took an active listening class, forget everything that you learned, it does not work. How many people have taken active listening and tried it and found that it was a disaster? Just put a 6 in the chat. Anybody? Yep, a few people. Yeah, so forget active listening. This is not active listening. Forget anything you ever learned about active listening. It's worthless, garbage. If active listening worked, I wouldn't be here talking to you about this. So just throw it out. Never use the term again. It doesn't exist. You're going to ignore the words, guess at the emotions, and you're going to reflect the emotions back with a use statement. You're angry. You're pissed off. You're frustrated. You feel completely disrespected. You don't feel heard. You feel ignored. You don't feel like you're being listened to, and you feel unappreciated and unsupported. And you're really worried and concerned and upset and frustrated. And you're scared and terrified. You're really pretty disgusted and appalled at what's going on. You feel a little bit of embarrassment and humiliation around all of this. You feel sad, and depressed, and upset and miserable because you don't have any connection. And at the end of the day, you feel completely abandoned and all alone, betrayed and rejected, and you feel completely worthless and unlovable. None of you were up that way, so how did that sit with you? How did it land with you when I labeled those emotions? How would you describe what you experienced in the last 30 seconds? Anybody want to take a shot at it? Empathy, exactly. This is what's known as cognitive empathy. You might have felt like, wow, I feel a little lighter. I feel a little more relaxed. This guy really gets me. He really understands me. He heard me. And as a result, you begin to relax. And this is the secret to stopping fights and arguments forever and learning how to de-escalate angry people. You ignore the words, guess at the emotions, and reflect back the emotions with the use statement. So I'm going to show you a demo of this. This is my wife and I. This is just a demonstration on a role play. This didn't really happen, but she is basically taking the role of a client of hers, and I am affect labeling. So watch, and what I'm going to ask you to do at the end is, what did you observe? So pay close attention. Well, there. What's going on?
Well, I was actually in a meeting today with a couple people, but there were two people in particular that were so incredibly disrespectful.
You were really disrespected.
Totally. It was so, beyond rude. And
That kind of pisses you off.
I just feel so frustrated. I'm so frustrated that
And not heard and disrespected.
and that they're not even aware of how disrespectful they are. And I'm their senior. I'm the one that's actually overseeing this and getting them to do what they need to be doing.
And you're just kind of astounded that these people,
I'm blown away.
blown away by the fact that these people are so disrespectful. They don't listen to you. They talk over you. You don't feel heard. And you're anxious about it.
I'm angry.
And you're really angry.
I'm really angry about it. It just makes me want to not do this job. Get out.
So, you're so angry about it.
Yeah. If the money wasn't as good as it is, then it wouldn't be worth it. But it's not even worth. I toss and turn. My stomach, it clenches. I have heartburn.
You have a lot of upset and stress over this, a lot of anxiety.
Totally. Just these two people, every single meeting, they do this. They pull this thing.
And these people are just driving you nuts.
It's unbelievable.
And the anxiety level is roof.
Yeah.
And you don't know what to do with yourself.
Yeah.
And no matter what you try to do, it doesn't seem to work.
No, nothing works. Whatever I do, it makes it worse.
And you're feeling really deeply sabotaged and betrayed by these people.
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
Anything else?
No.
Okay, so what have you observed? Any comments? Put them in the chat. I anticipated her emotions. Actually, I was reading her emotions, and she was having some emotions she didn't even know she was having, and I expressed those. And that's part of the beauty of this. So oftentimes people don't know what they're experiencing in an affect labeling. You can help them process their emotions. Rephrasing and agreeing. I really didn't agree with her. What I really did was just try to find out, just express to her what she was feeling. Anybody notice that no I statements? Yes, I was relating to our emotions. And how did I know how to end? at the end, I said, you were feeling really sabotaged and betrayed. And she said, yes, exactly. And that's when I knew we were done. So you're looking for 4 relaxation responses to know you're done. Number 1, a nodding of the head. A number 2, verbal response like, yeah, or exactly. Number 3, dropping of the shoulders. And 4, a sigh of relief. When you get those 4 unconscious automatic relaxation responses, the brain has completely quieted down. And that's it. Okay, so I'm coming to the end here. Here is a link to a page on my website that will give you more resources about everything that I've talked about. And you can email me at doug@dougnoll.com if you want to set up a Zoom call and chat about some more. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it. And we're ready to take questions. And Camilla, if you're there, why don't you pop on and we'll go from there.
Hi. Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much, Douglas. Right now, we're going to make a small switch. I'm going to share the screen for the last 5 slides that we have, okay?
You got it.
Okay, great.
Want me to stop sharing?
I'm looking for my screen that I'm going to share. So, yeah, you can stop sharing right now. Thank you.
You probably want this one to come out, don't you?
Yeah, but I'm going to share them in my screen to have, yes, just to have control of it. That's it. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Cannot see the chat right now. Douglas, are they saying yes? Okay. Yes, you can see my screen. Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for attending to today's session on how to calm an angry person in 90 seconds or less. With Douglas, I hope you find the insights and techniques as valuable and transformative as we did. And of course, this is a collaboration, and we're so happy because we also want to let you know that Virtual Latinos is your perfect virtual assistant source. And for your business that aligns with your needs, takes time and can get difficult. And that's why Virtual Latinos is here to spend your valuable time growing your business. Let a virtual professional take care of the rest, and handpick virtual professionals and assistants from Latin America for business owners and entrepreneurs. You might be asking why Virtual Latinos? Our VAs are operated in the U.S. time zones for a seamless collaboration. We're top 1% handpicked talent. We acknowledge all the HR services that sometimes can be very tough to find that virtual assistants you want for your company. We English test all of our virtual assistants for a seamless communication, and our VAs adapt to your schedule. You need part-time, full-time, weekends, evenings. We adapt to you. And thank you again for joining us for real. Imagine applying all the powerful de-escalation techniques that we just learned with the added support of a dedicated Virtual Latinos assistant managing your day-to-day tasks. This combination can significantly enhance your business efficiency and client interaction. So right now, I'm going to send in the chat our link. If you want to hop in a super quick 15 minutes, you can book a call, you register your business, you tell us what you need, and then we can chat. We'll be so happy to help you. It's in the chat. There's the link. It's super easy. So with that being said, I am so happy to go to our Q&A section. So it's your time to ask, Douglas. We'll be having some questions. I will be asking them, and Douglas, you will be answering. What about that?
There we are.
Okay, that's great. So we already have one question. Someone is asking, I would like to know how you prepare yourself to not get overwhelmed. Oh, someone.
I just can't. Oh. So the question was, how do you prepare yourself to not become overwhelmed or reactive when somebody is really upset and emotional?
That's right.
And the way you do this is a skill that grows with time. I typically find my clients take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks to really master these skills. It doesn't take a long time, but it takes some time in practice. And the more you practice it, the better you get at it. The less reactive you become in the face of other people's emotions, because number one, you're able to affect label yourself, so you calm down. Number two, you begin to see the same patterns of emotions over and over and over again. And so what once was an unpredictable, chaotic, messy, uncomfortable situation now is totally predictable. And you gain the ability with practice to walk into any situation, no matter how intense, and know exactly what to say, when to say it, and how to say it, and know exactly what the outcome is going to be, because you've seen it so many times before. And human beings really have a very limited repertoire of emotions. And everything that we do is highly repetitive, and we're all the same. And the beauty about this skill is that once you learn it, you begin to see how easy it is to work with emotions to calm people down. It just takes practice. And you start off in really simple, low-risk situations and slowly build your skill level up. And that's the coaching and teaching that I do, helping people do that. Any other questions?
Yes, we have another one, Douglas. Thank you so much for that answer. Someone is asking, Martin is asking, how do you handle a crisis, an unexpected crisis, things that pop up out of the sudden?
Right. So one of the things that you need to practice is what happens when somebody just jumps up and starts yelling at you for whatever reason. And again, it's the same thing. It's practice. It's being in one of the things that I do is I have de-escalation dojos where people come in and we yell at each other to get used to having people yelling at you, and then you immediately go into de-escalation mode and you start affect labeling. So part of it is learning how to become desensitized to somebody screaming at you and recognizing all you have to do is drop into your center, start listening for the emotions, reflect the emotions, and ignore everything else. And it doesn't take long to figure this out. And once you do start figuring it out, it's like you've got this protective energy bubble around you that people can't walk through. And you feel totally calm and confident at all times. And this just develops with practice. Usually people can get it that level in about 3 or 4 weeks of practice. So again, it's just simply putting in the reps, doing it over and over again until you get it. Starting in really safe situations, and then slowly going deeper into the pool, taking on more complex, more difficult situations as you build your confidence.
That's great. We have a phrase in Spanish that says, La práctica hace el maestro, which is practice makes master. I think it will be a translation, but you're so right, Douglas. Thank you. We have one last question. Someone is asking, most of the time we enter conflict resolutions meeting looking to end them as soon as possible. What will be your advice to change that mindset?
My advice is that once you learn how to affect label, you will end conflict faster than you've ever ended it before. So the goal that you have, which is to end conflict and end difficult conversations quickly and easily, is immediately achieved because you have a higher level skill set that allows you to calm people down or even prevent fights and arguments from occurring in the first place. And like I said, the whole process takes 90 seconds or less. And what would it be like in your life to be able to stop any fight or argument in 90 seconds or less? When most of your fights and arguments are going to go on for minutes or maybe hours with a lot of hurt feelings and hurt relationships. And in 90 seconds, you can stop it all. That's the beauty of this skill. It's absolutely magical how it works.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Douglas. Before we go, we have a comment of someone that said, before this meeting, I was focusing on customers only, but the insights shared by Douglas are really good to help you manage all kinds of relationships and situations. That's a great way to end this webinar. We're 2 minutes after the time. So I'm so sorry, but it was just so nourishing, everything we learned today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in this launch of Expert Lenses. Thank you, Douglas, for being here. We really appreciate it. Bye, everyone, and see you the next time.